ultimate werewolf romance, original cinematic fantasy stories where love, power, and destiny collide. She married the Alpha King's corpse to save her village. Then her dead husband came home. No one in Ashmore village believed the ancient marriage rite could summon the dead. They thought they were laying a fallen king to rest. Instead, they welcomed him home. Prologue: The King Who Disappeared. The first raven reached Frosthold before dawn. By noon, the kingdom had begun to mourn. Before sunset, they buried a king. Only one man knew the truth, and he intended to keep it that way. King Alaric Wintermere had survived the battle. Barely. The snow around him had turned crimson as he staggered through the narrow pass, one hand pressed against the wound beneath his ribs. Behind him, the northern battlefield smouldered beneath a sky the color of iron. Wintermere had won. Thousands of soldiers would soon return home, believing their king had led them to another victory. Alaric allowed himself one exhausted smile. He was going home. Then a familiar voice drifted through the snow. "Brother." Relief flooded him. Cedric. His younger brother stepped from the white haze with 12 royal guards at his back. Alaric laughed weakly. "I thought I'd lost you." For a heartbeat, Cedric said nothing. His face was pale, his eyes strangely empty. Then he whispered, "No, you lost me years ago." Alaric frowned. The words made no sense. Neither did the silence behind them. Not one guard moved to help their wounded king. Not one reached for his injuries. Instead, hands settled on sword hilts. A chill colder than winter slid through Alaric's chest. "Cedric, what are you doing?" His brother's jaw tightened. "I spent my whole life standing behind you." Snow drifted between them. "You were always stronger." Another step. Wiser. Another. More loved. His voice broke, and the first hated myself for wishing just once someone would choose me first. Alaric stared at him, not with anger, with heartbreak. He saw not a traitor, but the little brother he had taught to ride through these same mountains, the boy who once followed him everywhere, the child who had cried after breaking his arm because he feared disappointing him. "Cedric, you never had to compete with me." For the first time, tears filled Cedric's eyes. "I know." The words barely escaped him. And that's what made it unbearable. One of the guards lunged. Steel flashed. Pain exploded through Alaric's shoulder. Another blade struck his side. He stumbled backward. The world tilted beneath his feet. The edge of the cliff, behind him. Nothing but a frozen river hundreds of feet below. Alaric looked at his brother one final time. "I would have given you everything." Cedric's face crumpled. "I know," his voice shattered, "but I wanted the one thing you couldn't give. The chance to become you." The snow beneath Alaric's boots broke away for one impossible moment. The brothers simply looked at each other. Then the mountain vanished. Ice, sky, silence. The king disappeared into the abyss. By nightfall, the river had carried him far beyond the border, broken, unconscious, still breathing. Enemy scouts found him tangled beneath shattered ice along the riverbank. One soldier raised his sword. "The Wolf King, we finish this now. Wait." A deep voice stopped him. The soldiers stepped aside as a man in black wolf fur approached. Lord Malrek Voss, commander of the Black Fortress, the man kings feared but rarely saw. He knelt beside the unconscious ruler of Wintermere. His gloved hand brushed snow from Alaric's face. "So," he murmured, "the moon refuses to claim you." One captain frowned. "My lord, if he lives, his army will come." Malrek smiled. "No, they won't." He reached into Alaric's torn cloak and removed the royal signet ring. The silver wolf glimmered in the fading light. He closed his fist around it. "Tomorrow, they will bury an empty coffin." He looked toward the frozen mountains stretching endlessly behind them. "And the world will stop searching." The commander's eyes settled once more on the unconscious king. "Because the strongest prison is not built with stone, he rose. It is built with certainty. When people believe you are dead, they eventually stop hoping. The soldiers lifted Alaric onto a prison wagon. Iron chains locked around his wrists. The heavy gates of the black fortress opened, then closed behind him, like the sound of history forgetting. Far to the south, church bells were already ringing across Wintermere. Candles were being lit. Black banners climbed castle walls. A royal coffin carrying only folded armor and an empty cloak waited to be lowered into the earth. And in a tiny village called Hollowmere, a young baker's daughter named Evangeline Ashmere was kneading the last sack of flour her village possessed, completely unaware that somewhere beyond the northern mountains her husband was still alive. Chapter 1. The Man They Buried. When King Alaric Wintermere opened his eyes again, he no longer knew whether it was day or night. There were no windows, only stone, cold, damp stone that swallowed light and sound alike. His head throbbed. Every breath scraped against broken ribs. When he tried to lift his arm, iron answered first. Chains, heavy enough to remind him exactly where he was. Alive, unfortunately. For several long moments, he simply listened. Water dripped somewhere beyond the darkness. A distant door slammed. Someone screamed. Then silence swallowed everything again. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, to remember. The battle, the mountain pass, Cedric, the look on his brother's face. Not hatred, not triumph. Something worse, regret. That was the wound he could not understand. The iron door opened. Torchlight spilled into the cell. Lord Malrec Voss entered alone. He carried no weapon. He did not need one. Power followed him as naturally as shadow. "You survived the fever." Alaric said nothing. Malrec walked slowly around the small cell, studying the prisoner the way a scholar might study an ancient relic. "I've heard many stories about you." Still silence. "They all begin the same way." He smiled faintly. "The Great Alpha King." The title echoed through the cell, then disappeared. Malrec looked directly into Alaric's eyes. "Titles are fascinating. They vanish so quickly." He placed something carefully on the floor. A polished silver mirror. Alaric frowned. For the first time since the river, he saw himself. Bruises darkened half his face. His beard had already begun to grow. His shoulder was crudely stitched. His golden eyes looked older. He barely recognized the man staring back. Malrec watched the realization settle. The king is gone. His voice remained calm. "What remains? Is prisoner 27? Alaric slowly pushed the mirror away. "My name," his voice was rough from disuse, "is Alaric." Malrec nodded. It was. He picked the mirror up again. "Names require witnesses." The words lingered in the cold air. "Outside these walls, no one speaks yours anymore." After Malrec left, the silence returned. Hours passed, perhaps days. Time had already begun to lose its shape. A bowl of thin broth appeared twice or maybe once. Sleep came without warning. Memory arrived without mercy. Sometimes he dreamed of Frosthold, his mother's laugh, training with Cedrica's boys, the smell of pine after spring rain. Then he woke to stone. Always stone. On what he believed was the 5th day, another prisoner was dragged into the neighboring cell. The old wolf collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Neither spoke. Conversation felt dangerous here. Later that night, the old prisoner whispered through the cracks in the stone. "What did they call you?" Alaric hesitated, then answered honestly, 27. The old wolf gave a tired laugh. "Good." Alaric frowned. "Good. It means you're still remembering." The old prisoner's voice grew quieter. "Most of us stop. Silence. Then another whisper. When you forget your own name. The fortress wins." The words refused to leave him. For the first time since his capture, Alaric repeated his name under his breath, not loudly, just enough to hear it. Alaric again. Alaric again. Alaric Wintermere, king, son, brother, wolf. He would not let stone decide who he was. That evening, Malric returned. He found the king sitting upright despite obvious pain. "You look disappointed," Alaric said. Malric's eyebrow lifted. "Why would I be disappointed because I'm still here? For the first time?" The commander laughed, a genuine laugh. "You misunderstand me." He stepped closer. "I don't want you dead." His expression settled once more into calm certainty. "I want you forgotten." Then he leaned close enough that only Alaric could hear. "Death lasts a moment. Being forgotten lasts forever." The heavy door closed again. Darkness reclaimed the room. Far beyond the northern mountains, church bells continued ringing for a king already laid to rest. And in a starving village called Hollowmere, a young woman was about to receive an impossible royal decree that would unknowingly bind her fate to the man the world had buried, but who refused to let even the darkness make him forget his own name. Chapter 2. The last loaf. Morning came quietly to Hollowmere, not because the village was peaceful, because hunger had stolen the strength to make noise. The bakery at the edge of the square should have smelled of fresh bread. Years ago it always had. Children once raced through its doors before sunrise, laughing as flour dusted their noses, while old Elias Ashmere pretended to scold them for stealing warm rolls from the cooling racks. Those mornings belonged to another life. Now the ovens sat cold. The flour bins were nearly empty. The shelves held only silence. Evangeline Ashmere brushed her fingers across the bottom of the last flour barrel, gathering every remaining handful into a wooden bowl. It wasn't enough, not even close. She sifted it anyway. Her father had always said, "Respect every grain. Someone worked hard to grow it." She still lived by that lesson, even after 2 years without him. The bakery had become quieter since Elias died. Some mornings she still caught herself turning toward the back room, expecting to hear his steady whistle while he kneaded dough. The silence that answered was gentler now, but no less real. She tied back her chestnut hair, rolled up her sleeves, and added the final cup of water. The dough came together slowly, too little flour, too much hope. She smiled faintly at the thought. Her father would have laughed at that. Outside, footsteps crunched over the thawing ground. A hesitant knock sounded at the door. Before she could answer, a small voice called through the wood. "Miss Evangeline?" She opened the door. Lena stood there, no more than 7 years old, wrapped in an oversized wool coat that had once belonged to her older brother. The little girl's cheeks were pale. Her eyes drifted immediately toward the mixing bowl. Evangeline noticed. She noticed everything. "Good morning." Lena tried to smile. "My mama said not to bother you, and yet here you are." The child looked down at her boots. "My baby brother cried all night." Evangeline's heart tightened. "He says he's hungry." Silence settled between them, not awkward, only honest. Children had stopped pretending in Hollowmere. Hunger had taken that too. Without a word, Evangeline returned to the table. She divided the small piece of dough in half, then in half again, then once more. Each piece became smaller than the last. She placed 2 warm rolls into Lena's hands. The little girl stared. "But, you'll have none." Evangeline smiled. "I've already eaten." It was a practiced lie, gentle, effortless. The kind spoken only by people who loved someone more than themselves. Lena hesitated, then hugged the bread against her chest as though it were treasure. "Thank you." Before running home, she turned back. "My mama says Papa used to smile when he bought your father's bread." Evangeline blinked. "He did?" Lena nodded earnestly. "She says your bread made people feel like tomorrow would be okay." The child hurried away. Evangeline stood in the doorway long after she disappeared. Tears gathered quietly in her eyes, not because of the compliment, because she wondered if her father had ever known how many people remembered his kindness. She whispered into the empty bakery, "I hope I'm making you proud." The only answer was the soft creak of the cooling oven. Near midday, the village bell rang once, then again, not an alarm, a summons. People emerged slowly from their homes, exchanging worried glances. Summons usually meant bad news. Evangeline wiped the flour from her hands and followed the others toward the village square. She noticed how thin everyone looked, how carefully parents walked beside children, as if trying to hide their own weakness. Old Thomas Reed leaned heavily on his cane. Miriam, the village healer, carried an empty basket she no longer bothered pretending would be filled. Even the village dogs had stopped barking. Winter had taken almost everything. Only dignity remained. At the center of the square stood 3 mounted royal messengers. Their horses looked healthier than anyone in Hollowmere. That alone told Evangeline how desperate the village had become. The oldest messenger unrolled a parchment bearing the royal seal. His expression was solemn, almost reluctant. "My people," he began quietly, "I bring a decree from the Royal Council of Wintermere." A hush fell over the square. The messenger drew a slow breath. "It concerns the late King Alaric." Every head bowed instinctively. Even now, months after the funeral, grief lingered across the kingdom like winter frost. The messenger continued, "The council has reached a decision regarding the future of the crown." His voice faltered for just a moment. Then he read the words that would change every life in Hollowmere. "There is one final duty that must be fulfilled before the kingdom can move forward." The crowd looked at one another in confusion. No one understood. Not yet. The messenger lowered the parchment. His eyes swept across the hungry faces before him. When he spoke again, his voice carried something far heavier than duty. It carried shame. "The kingdom seeks a bride, but before its dead king." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. No one breathed. No one moved. No one yet understood that before this day ended, one young baker's daughter would make a choice that history would remember for generations. Chapter 3. The Price of a Kingdom. The silence in Hollowmere did not end when the royal messengers lowered their parchment. It followed everyone home. By evening, no smoke rose from most chimneys, not because families had finished cooking, because there was almost nothing left to cook. The village square, so often quiet from exhaustion, slowly filled again as lanterns flickered to life beneath the gathering dusk. Every household had sent someone. Old Thomas Reed leaned heavily on his cane. Miriam stood beside him, her weathered face unreadable. Mothers held restless children close. Fathers kept their eyes fixed on the ground. The royal messengers remained exactly where they had been all afternoon. They had not eaten. Neither had most of the villagers. The eldest messenger finally stepped forward. "My name is Chancellor Rowan's envoy, Sir Aldrin." His voice carried no pride, only duty. "I owe every one of you an explanation." He looked across the worn faces before him. "When His Majesty King Alaric Wintermere fell during the northern campaign, the kingdom lost more than its ruler." He paused. "It lost certainty. No one spoke. The royal bloodline ended with him." A murmur spread through the crowd. "The council has spent months searching ancient law for a peaceful solution." Sir Aldrin carefully unrolled another parchment. "The oldest royal covenant contains one forgotten provision." His expression tightened. "It has never been invoked in living memory." Even the wind seemed to hesitate. If a reigning monarch dies unmarried before producing an heir, a ceremonial union may be performed after death. Gasps rippled through the square. The envoy continued before anyone could interrupt. "The marriage carries no expectation of family, no expectation of children, no expectation of ordinary married life. It is a sacred rite acknowledging that the king did not leave this world alone." The villagers stared at him as though he had begun speaking another language. Then came the next sentence. "The woman who accepts this duty becomes the kingdom's royal widow." Another silence. He lowered the parchment in return. His voice almost broke. "The crown will adopt her village under permanent royal protection." People frowned. They did not yet understand. Sir Aldrin forced himself to continue. "All taxes will be forgiven. Every harvest for the next 10 years will be supplied by the royal granaries. New wells, new roads, a permanent garrison. Livestock, seed grain, tools, medicine. No family in Hollowmere would ever face another winter alone. Someone whispered, "Forever?" The envoy nodded. "Forever." The words landed with breathtaking weight. Not a gift, a future, one impossible choice for generations of lives. An older man stepped forward first. "No." His voice trembled with anger. "You ask us to bury one of our daughters with a dead man." Another villager shouted, "This isn't honor, it's cruelty. My granddaughter is 17, I'd rather starve." Voices rose across the square. The crowd surged. Fear quickly became outrage. Sir Aldrin did not argue. He simply listened. When the shouting finally quieted, he spoke softly. "I have a daughter." That single sentence silenced everyone. "She is 19. His eyes glistened. "If this decree had come to my village, I do not know if I could ask her." A painful pause followed. "But I also know what famine becomes." He looked toward the children clinging to their mothers. "I have walked through villages where no children laughed anymore. I have buried boys who should have grown old. I have watched mothers pretend they had already eaten." His eyes swept across Hollowmere. "You are already living that nightmare. No one could deny it." Miriam stepped forward. "How much time do we have?" Sir Aldrin answered without hesitation. "The royal supply wagons are waiting beyond the southern ridge." Hope flickered across tired faces. "If a bride accepts the covenant, they enter Hollowmere tomorrow. And if no one does?" The envoy lowered his eyes. The wagons returned to the capital. No one breathed. Old Thomas closed his eyes. Everyone understood. There would be no second offer. The meeting dissolved into frightened conversations. Families pulled daughters close. Young women quietly slipped away before anyone could look at them. Some cried, some argued, some prayed. No one volunteered, not even for a moment. Evangeline remained where she was, watching, listening, feeling the weight of every frightened face around her. She did not blame them. How could she? The choice was impossible. When darkness finally settled over Hollowmere, she walked home alone. The bakery greeted her with familiar silence. She lit one small candle. Its warm glow revealed flour still scattered across the old wooden table. Her father's apron still hung from its peg. She had never moved it. She wasn't ready. As she brushed dust from the workbench, something caught her eye. A small wooden box tucked behind an old recipe book. She frowned. She had never seen it before. Inside lay her father's journal. The leather cover was worn smooth by years of use. She opened it carefully. Most pages contained recipes, measurements, notes about harvests, names of families who couldn't afford bread. Beside many of those names, one simple sentence appeared again and again. "Do not tell them it was free." Evangeline smiled through gathering tears. That sounded exactly like him. Then she turned to the final written page. The handwriting had grown weaker, unsteady, written shortly before he died. "If you are reading this, little sparrow," her breath caught. Only her father had ever called her that. "Life will someday ask you a question no one else can answer for you. When that day comes, do not ask which choice is easier. Ask which choice lets you look at yourself without regret." A tear slipped onto the page. She gently wiped it away. Then she read the final line. "Bread is only flour until someone chooses to give it away." The same is true of love. The bakery became impossibly still. Outside, the village waited for dawn. Inside, a daughter closed her father's journal against her heart. And for the first time, the impossible choice no longer felt impossible. It simply felt unbearably heavy. Chapter 4. The Girl Who Stayed Awake Until Morning. Some choices were not made in a single moment. They were made one heartbeat at a time. Evangeline did not sleep. The candle beside her father's journal burned low, shrinking into a pool of wax while the village outside disappeared beneath another bitter night. She sat at the old bakery table, her fingers tracing the grooves worn into the wood by decades of kneading dough. This was where her father had taught her to bake, where he had laughed when she dropped flour over half the kitchen, where he had told her that feeding someone was one of the quietest ways to tell them they mattered. Now the room felt impossibly large. Every shadow seemed to ask the same question. What are you willing to give? She rested her forehead against folded hands. I don't know what to do, Papa. The words barely rose above a whisper. No answer came, only the familiar creak of the rafters as the winter wind pushed gently against the roof. Before dawn, a knock echoed softly through the bakery. Miriam. The village healer stepped inside carrying a small basket. It held 3 potatoes. Nothing more. She placed them on the table without speaking. They're for you. Evangeline blinked. You need them more. So does everyone. Miriam sat opposite her. We've started counting. Counting? The children? The older woman's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her. If food doesn't arrive. She stopped. She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. Evangeline understood how long. Miriam looked toward the window where the first hint of grey touched the sky. 4 days. The words settled like stone. Maybe 5. Silence filled the bakery. Not dramatic, just heavy, the kind of silence shared by people who already knew the truth. Miriam finally spoke. I came because I thought you should know. Know what? The healer met her eyes. People are beginning to choose who eats. Evangeline's breath caught. What? The elderly are pretending they aren't hungry, so the children can have another bowl. She looked down. Some mothers have stopped eating altogether. Another pause. They think no one notices. Tears blurred Evangeline's vision. She had noticed. She simply hadn't realized how many. After Miriam left, Evangeline walked through Hollowmere. The village was awake, but not alive. Thomas Reed stood repairing a fence that no longer held livestock. Clara Bennett hung empty laundry lines simply because routine was easier than despair. Little Owen Harper chased a wooden hoop through the snow until dizziness forced him to stop. Everywhere she looked, people smiled at one another, small smiles, brave smiles, the kind people wore when they feared the truth would break someone else. As she passed the well, she overheard 2 fathers speaking in hushed voices. If they choose my Anna, I'll refuse, so will I. What if another family accepts? The first man lowered his head. Then I'll spend the rest of my life thanking them, and hating myself for it. Evangeline walked on. Near the edge of the village stood a tiny cottage. Its roof sagged beneath old snow. Inside lived Eleanor Briggs, 90 years old, nearly blind. Evangeline knocked softly. Come in. The old woman smiled before she even reached the chair. I know those footsteps. You always do. You still walk like your father. Evangeline laughed quietly. I didn't know footsteps could be inherited. Oh, child. Eleanor reached for her hand. Love is inherited. She squeezed gently. So is kindness. The words lingered. Evangeline helped prepare a simple broth from the last vegetables in the cottage. When the bowl was ready, Eleanor pushed it back toward her. You eat. I already have. A lie. The old woman chuckled. Your father told the same terrible lie. She divided the broth into 2 bowls anyway. Kind people always think they're invisible. They're usually wrong. By afternoon, the village bell rang again. Everyone gathered. Not because they expected different news, because hope makes people attend meetings they already fear. Sir Aldrin stood where he had the night before. His face looked even more tired. I leave at sunset. The words echoed across the square. The council asked only one answer, yes or no, nothing more. No one stepped forward. The silence stretched. Children looked toward their parents. Parents looked toward the ground. Even the wind seemed unwilling to interrupt. Sir Aldrin slowly rolled the parchment closed. I understand he truly did. No judgment crossed his face, only sadness. He turned toward his horse. 1 step, then another. The royal guards followed. The wagons beyond the ridge would leave with them. Hollowmere would return to waiting for a spring that many would never see. Evangeline looked around the square. She saw Lena holding her little brother's hand, Thomas Reed trying to stand straighter than his age allowed, Miriam closing her eyes in quiet resignation. The bakery, the well, The people who had watched her grow from a child into a woman, her home. She heard her father's last words from the journal. Do not ask which choice is easier. Ask which choice lets you look at yourself without regret. Her heartbeat thundered. Fear wrapped around every breath. She wasn't fearless. She had never been fearless. She wanted a family, children, ordinary mornings, a husband who laughed too loudly, a life no one would ever write songs about. She wanted all of it, and because she wanted it, she understood exactly what she was about to lose. That was what made the next step so difficult. She took it anyway. Sir Aldrin the envoy stopped, slowly. The entire village turned. Evangeline's hands trembled. Her knees felt weak. For one terrifying heartbeat, no words came. Then she found them, not loudly, not dramatically, simply, clearly. I'll go. Silence, absolute silence. Lena began to cry first, then Clara. Then Thomas quietly removed his cap. Sir Aldrin did not answer immediately. His eyes searched her face, almost hoping she would change her mind. You understand what you're saying? Evangeline nodded. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I do. You may never marry again. I know. You will spend your life carrying the title of a king's widow. I know. There is still time to reconsider. She looked once toward Holomere, toward every person she loved, then back at the envoy. If my village gets another tomorrow. Her voice broke. Then my answer is yes. No one applauded. No one cheered. Some moments are too sacred for noise. The first person to move was Miriam. She crossed the square and wrapped Evangeline in a fierce embrace. One by one, the rest of Holomere followed, not to celebrate, but to remember. Far beyond the mountains, deep beneath the black fortress, a forgotten king sat alone in the darkness. For reasons he could not explain, his heart began to beat a little faster, as though somewhere in the world, fate itself had just taken its first step toward him. Chapter 5. The morning everyone pretended was ordinary. Morning arrived exactly as it always had. That was the cruelest part. The sun still climbed over the eastern hills. The bakery windows still caught the first golden light. The village rooster still crowed as though nothing in the world had changed. Only Holomere knew better. Evangeline woke before dawn. For several quiet moments, she lay still beneath her quilt, listening to the familiar sounds of home. The old beams above her creaked gently. Rainwater dripped from the corner gutter outside. Somewhere across the square, someone yawned loudly enough to wake half the village. She smiled. Old Thomas. Even his yawns were impossible to ignore. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow. Those sounds would belong to memory. She lit the bakery oven one final time. The fire resisted at first, then slowly came alive beneath careful hands. The warmth spread through the little room. It smelled of ash, of oak, of childhood. She reached automatically for the flour bin, then stopped. Only enough remained for one last batch. She rested her palm against the worn wood. Let's make it count. As the dough rested, another pair of hands quietly reached toward it. Tiny fingers, covered in flour within seconds. I wasn't touching it. Evangeline laughed without turning around. You've been here exactly 5 heartbeats, Sophie. So you've already stolen dough. I was protecting it. From what? Loneliness. Evangeline finally turned. 10-year-old Sophie Reed stood proudly holding a misshapen lump of dough that looked more like a potato than bread. I call him Sir Dobert. You named the dough. He seemed lonely. Evangeline covered her smile. Sir Dobert appears to have only one ear. He lost the other in battle. I see. Against a goose. A very brave goose. The bravest, for the first time in many weeks. The bakery echoed with laughter, real laughter, the kind that surprised people because they'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. 20 minutes later, half the village somehow found reasons to visit the bakery. Thomas claimed he needed to borrow a hammer. He left carrying bread instead. Clara insisted she had only stopped by to return a bowl. She accidentally stayed long enough to help knead dough. Miriam arrived to check whether anyone had eaten breakfast. She quietly accepted a warm roll before anyone could notice. Sophie walked around introducing everyone to Sir Dobert. No one questioned it, not even Thomas, especially after Sophie informed him that Sir Dobert outranked him. "I've been defeated by bread." Thomas sighed dramatically. "I suppose retirement is my only option." "You've been retired for years," Clara reminded him. "I was hoping no one had noticed." Another ripple of laughter filled the bakery. Evangeline stood quietly beside the oven, watching them. She memorized every face, every smile, every ridiculous conversation. Without realizing it, her father had once built far more than a bakery. He had built the heart of Hollowmere. She had simply inherited it. When the bread finished baking, Evangeline wrapped each loaf in clean linen. Before tying the cloth, she paused. From a small drawer she removed scraps of soft fabric, a habit from her father. He had always tucked little notes into special orders. Never signed, never expecting thanks. She dipped a pen into ink, then wrote carefully, "May whoever shares this loaf never eat alone." She folded the cloth around the bread. Another loaf, another message. Kindness always finds its way home. Another. If today feels heavy, may tomorrow surprise you. Sophie watched with wide eyes. "Why do you hide the words?" "So they belong to whoever needs them. But they won't know who wrote them." Evangeline smiled gently. "Sometimes that's the nicest part." Sophie thought very hard about this, then nodded as though it explained everything. "It sounds like something your papa would do." Evangeline's smile softened. "It does." By midday, the last loaf had been given away. Not sold, given. No one argued. Everyone knew why. The empty shelves somehow felt fuller than they had in months. That afternoon, the village gathered beneath the great ash tree overlooking Hollowmere. Not because anyone had planned a farewell, because no one wanted Evangeline to leave without one. Children brought wildflowers gathered from the first signs of spring. Thomas carved a tiny wooden rolling pin no longer than a finger. "For your kitchen," she laughed through tears. "I don't even know if I'll have one." "You will someday." His voice carried quiet certainty. "And when you do, remember that bread tastes better when someone steals the first slice." Sophie immediately raised her hand. "I volunteer. I had no doubt." Then Eleanor Briggs slowly approached. The old woman leaned heavily on her cane. "I've lived long enough to know something." She placed a weathered blue ribbon into Evangeline's hand. It was faded with age, but beautifully kept. "I wore this when I married my Thomas." Her smile trembled. 63 years ago. Evangeline looked up, startled. "I can't take this." "You can." Eleanor gently closed Evangeline's fingers around the ribbon. "I married for love." "You." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "Are marrying for all of ours." No one spoke. Even Sophie fell silent. The wind stirred gently through the ash tree, carrying the scent of warm bread across the square one last time. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Sir Aldrin's wagon rolled quietly into Hollowmere. He climbed down, removed his gloves, and bowed. "We leave at first light." Evangeline nodded. "I'll be ready." The envoy hesitated, then looked around the village. "I have visited many places." His voice was low. "I have never seen one love a single person quite like this." Thomas answered before anyone else could. "We don't." Sir Aldrin frowned. Thomas smiled sadly. "We love the girl who spent years making us forget we were poor." The envoy lowered his head. For the first time since receiving the council's decree, he silently prayed that history would remember her correctly. That night, long after the village had gone to sleep, Evangeline stood alone outside the bakery. She touched the wooden door one last time. "I'll come home." She wasn't sure whether she was promising the bakery, her father, or herself, far beyond the northern mountains. A forgotten king lay awake beneath stone, unable to explain why. For the first time since entering the Black Fortress, he dreamed of warm bread. Chapter 6. Two roads beneath the same winter sky. Morning came wrapped in silver frost, for the first time in weeks. Hollowmere did not wake to the smell of bread. The bakery stood dark. Its chimney released no smoke. Its windows reflected only the pale light of dawn. People noticed. No one mentioned it. Evangeline quietly folded the last of her belongings into a small leather satchel. There was very little to pack. 2 dresses. A wool cloak patched so many times the original fabric was difficult to recognize. Her father's recipe journal, Thomas's tiny carved rolling pin, and Eleanor's faded blue ribbon. She held the ribbon for a long moment before tying it carefully around the handle of the satchel. It fluttered gently in the morning breeze. A piece of home. A knock sounded. She already knew who it was. "Come in," Sophie burst through the door, carrying something hidden behind her back. "I brought you a royal gift." "Oh? It's extremely expensive," she dramatically revealed. A slightly crooked flower crown woven from tiny white winter blossoms. Most of the flowers had already begun to wilt. Then Evangeline gently placed the flower crown on her head. "It is the most beautiful crown I've ever worn." Sophie's entire face brightened. "I knew queens liked flowers." Evangeline smiled softly. "I'm not a queen." The little girl tilted her head. "Maybe not today, outside." The entire village had gathered, not because anyone had asked them to, because no one intended to let her leave alone. Sir Aldrin stood respectfully beside the royal carriage. He had delayed their departure without complaint. Even he understood some farewells could not be hurried. Thomas stepped forward carrying a cloth bundle. "You forgot lunch. I thought we'd already said goodbye." "We did." He handed her the bundle anyway. "So this isn't goodbye." Inside were 2 warm oatcakes, still warm. Eleanor slowly approached. She pressed both weathered hands against Evangeline's cheeks. "When you feel lonely," she whispered, "don't ask whether people still love you." She smiled through tears. "They do. Ask whether you remember to let yourself feel it." Evangeline closed her eyes. "I'll remember." "No," the old woman kissed her forehead, "you'll forget. Everyone does. So one day, when someone is kind to you, let them." One by one, the villagers embraced her. Some spoke, some couldn't. Then Sophie tugged gently at Evangeline's sleeve. "I have a question. You usually do. The king can hear people." Evangeline blinked. "What do you mean?" "The dead king." Sophie's voice became very quiet. "When you meet him, will you tell him? Thank you? For what?" The child looked around the village. "For saving us." Silence swept through the square. Even Sir Aldrin lowered his head. Evangeline knelt. She brushed a loose curl away from Sophie's face. "I promise." Sophie's eyes filled with relief. "Good. I didn't want him to think we forgot." The carriage began rolling just after sunrise. Nobody waved wildly. Nobody shouted. They simply stood together beneath the great ash tree, watching until the carriage disappeared beyond the southern hill. Only then did Hollowmere begin walking home. The village felt strangely quieter, as though someone had taken away its morning song. Far to the north, another morning began very differently. The black fortress awakened with iron bells. Guards marched through frozen corridors. Chains rattled. Doors opened. Prisoners emerged one by one. Among them, prisoner 27. Alaric Wintermere lifted a heavy bucket of water onto his shoulder. His wounds had healed enough to work, not enough to stop hurting. Captain Rowan Ashcroft fell into step beside him. "You still look terrible." "I appreciate your consistency. I take pride in it." They carried the buckets together. "I had a dream," Rowan said. "Oh?" "I was eating roast goose." Alaric nodded thoughtfully. "A fine dream." "It was." Rowan sighed dramatically. "Then I woke up chewing my blanket." Despite himself, Alaric laughed. The sound surprised both of them. It had been months, perhaps longer. Rowan grinned. "There he is." "Who?" "The man beneath all that frowning." "I don't frown." You've been frowning since sunrise. I was asleep. You frowned in your sleep. Their laughter ended as Lord Malrec entered the workyard. The commander walked with his usual measured calm. He stopped beside Alaric. You've gained strength. So have you. Alaric almost smiled. I don't imagine prison agrees with you. I don't imagine betrayal agrees with anyone. A long silence settled between them. Then Malrec dismissed the guards with a small gesture. They moved out of earshot. Only Rowan remained nearby, pretending to be deeply fascinated by a pile of stones. Malrec looked directly at Alaric. Tell me something. If I answer, I'll ask another question. If I don't, I'll ask the same one tomorrow. Alaric considered him. What do you want? Malrec's eyes drifted toward the snow-covered mountains beyond the walls. When you ruled, did you ever wonder why the northern tribes stopped raiding your villages? Alaric frowned. They accepted peace. Did they? Malrec's voice carried something unreadable. Or did someone convince them to? Before Alaric could answer, Malrec turned and walked away, leaving only questions behind. Rowan finally approached. I dislike conversations that create more mysteries than answers. So do I. You think he's lying? Alaric watched the commander disappear through the gate. No, I think he wants me to remember something. That evening, behind a narrow slit in a prison wall. Alaric looked through falling snow at the same evening sky. Neither knew the other existed. Neither knew that destiny had already begun weaving their lives together. Chapter 7. The Castle That Refused to Forget. The first thing Evangeline noticed about Frosthold Keep was the silence. Not the peaceful silence of snowfall across fields. Not the gentle quiet of dawn in Hollowmere. This silence carried memory. It settled between the towering stone walls like someone who had once belonged there, and never truly left. The carriage rolled beneath the great gatehouse. Massive iron doors opened slowly. No trumpets sounded, no cheering crowds waited, only rows of guards standing with perfect discipline. Each lowered a clenched fist over his heart as the carriage passed. Not for her. For the king they believed she had come to honor. Evangeline lowered her eyes. The gesture made her chest ache. The palace courtyard was larger than Hollowmere itself. Servants crossed the stone paths carrying baskets, ledgers, firewood, and armfuls of winter flowers. Everyone worked. No one hurried. Grief had taught this place patience. Sir Aldrin stepped down first and offered his hand. Welcome to Frosthold. She looked around uncertainly. It feels, she searched for the right word, lonely, the envoy nodded. It has felt that way for 3 years. Before she could say another word, footsteps echoed across the courtyard. A woman in her late 60s approached with measured dignity. Her silver hair was neatly braided beneath a dark veil. Her posture remained straight despite the cane she carried. She stopped before Evangeline. For several long moments, she simply looked at her, not critically, not coldly, almost sadly. So young, the words escaped before she could stop them. She immediately bowed. I beg your forgiveness. There is nothing to forgive, Evangeline answered gently. The older woman's eyes softened. I am Lady Agnes Blackwood, House Steward of Frosthold. I have served this palace for 42 years. Her voice remained composed. I carried His Majesty in my arms when he was born. The sentence landed with unexpected weight. She hadn't served a king, she had helped raise a little boy. Suddenly, the palace no longer felt like stone. It felt like a home that had lost its eldest son. Lady Agnes led her through long corridors warmed by countless fireplaces. Portraits lined the walls, kings, queens, generals, children. History watched quietly from gilded frames. Then, Evangeline stopped walking. One portrait held her completely still. A young man stood beneath a snow-covered pine. Broad shoulders, calm golden eyes, dark hair stirred by the wind. No crown, no throne. Only a faint smile that reached his eyes. She stared. Lady Agnes noticed. That was painted shortly before the Northern Campaign. Evangeline couldn't look away. He looks, she hesitated. Kind, Lady Agnes smiled through gathering tears. He embarrassed the council quite regularly. Evangeline blinked. How? He kept pardoning people. As they continued walking, Lady Agnes began speaking, not because protocol demanded it, but because memory did. When he was 12, he climbed onto the palace roof. Evangeline looked startled. The king? The prince, then. He claimed a frightened cat required immediate diplomatic assistance. What happened? Captain Hollis climbed after him, and they both became stuck. Evangeline laughed before she could stop herself. Lady Agnes laughed too. A gardener eventually rescued both of them. The prince insisted the cat deserved all the credit. The laughter faded into warm silence. For the first time since entering Frosthold, the palace felt alive, not because grief had disappeared, because love still remained. They reached a pair of tall oak doors. Lady Agnes opened them slowly. "This will be your room." Sunlight streamed through wide windows overlooking Frosthold's gardens. A small fireplace already crackled warmly. Fresh linens covered the bed. On the table rested a simple ceramic vase holding white winter roses. No luxury beyond what was needed, everything chosen with quiet care. Evangeline ran her fingers across the windowsill. "You prepared all this?" Lady Agnes answered matter-of-factly. "Of course, you are our guest," the word surprised Evangeline. "I thought—" she hesitated. "I wasn't sure how people would see me." Lady Agnes turned toward her. "My dear," her voice carried the certainty of age, "no one here blames the woman who agreed to carry our grief." A soft knock interrupted them. The door opened just enough for a young kitchen maid to peek inside. She couldn't have been older than 18. Freckles dusted her cheeks. A flour smudge decorated the tip of her nose. She immediately tried wiping it away, only succeeding in making it worse. "I'm terribly sorry," Lady Agnes sighed affectionately. "Lily, you have been apologizing since Tuesday." "I know, I'm very sorry." Evangeline smiled. Lily froze. "What? You smiled?" Evangeline looked confused. "Shouldn't I?" Lily looked genuinely astonished. "I forgot what that looked like in this hallway." The room became very quiet. Lady Agnes looked toward the window, not wanting either young woman to see the tears gathering in her eyes. That evening, dinner was served in a smaller family dining room rather than the grand hall, Lady Agnes insisted. "The grand hall is for ceremonies. This house needs conversation." The meal itself was simple. Roasted vegetables, fresh soup, brown bread. Lily accidentally dropped an entire basket of rolls onto the floor. She covered her face. "I've ruined everything." Before anyone could comfort her, Lady Agnes calmly picked up one roll, blew the flour away, took a bite. She nodded thoughtfully. "The floor appears to have improved the seasoning." Lily stared, then burst into helpless laughter. Even the elderly steward allowed herself a mischievous smile. Evangeline laughed until tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness, just laughter, real, unexpected, healing. For one precious evening, the castle remembered how to sound like home, long after everyone had gone to bed. Evangeline wandered quietly onto the balcony outside her room. Snow drifted gently across Frosthold. She looked toward the countless lights glowing throughout the sleeping city below. "So many people," she whispered. "So many people who still miss you." She looked back toward the portrait visible through her open door. "I hope," her voice barely carried on the wind, "I can honor you well. Far to the north, a king no one believed alive stood awake behind iron bars. The same moonlight touched them both. One prayed for a man she had never met. The other silently wondered whether anyone still remembered his name. Neither could imagine that before winter ended, they would become the answer to each other's loneliness. Chapter 8. The Crown That Never Fit. The throne room echoed with applause. Cedric Wintermere smiled. The expression reached his lips, never his eyes. "The Western Trade Agreement has been signed, Your Majesty." Another noble bowed. "The Southern mines have exceeded expectations." Another report. "The harvest taxes have arrived safely." Another success. "The border remains peaceful." Every announcement painted the picture of a kingdom under firm rule. Every noble looked pleased. Every advisor nodded approvingly. The kingdom was stable, prosperous, safe. Cedric should have felt victorious. Instead, he couldn't stop looking at the empty throne beside his own. It had remained there by his order, untouched. No one was allowed to remove it. When asked why, he always gave the same answer. "It belonged to my brother." No one dared question him further. But every time he entered the throne room, he saw not an empty chair. He saw Alaric laughing after another council meeting, leaning back with effortless confidence, asking whether anyone had eaten before discussing politics. The memory vanished as another minister stepped forward. "The people are grateful for your leadership, Your Majesty." Cedric nodded automatically. "Continue the relief shipments to the northern villages. Double the grain reserves before winter." The minister blinked. That was King Alaric's policy. Cedric's answer came without thought. It worked. Silence settled for a heartbeat. Then the meeting continued. No one noticed Cedric's hand tighten around the carved arm of the throne. When the court finally adjourned, the room emptied quickly. Only Chancellor Oswin remained. He had served the royal family since Cedric and Alaric were children. Age had bent his shoulders. It had not dulled his perception. "You didn't celebrate." Cedric kept looking at the empty throne. "There was nothing to celebrate. The kingdom prospers. The kingdom survives." Oswin studied him. "Those are not the same thing." Cedric closed his eyes briefly. "No, they're not." The old chancellor approached the vacant throne. He brushed a speck of dust from its armrest. "I remember when His Majesty insisted this chair be widened." Cedric frowned. "Why?" "So you could sit beside him during council meetings." A faint smile touched Oswin's face. "You were only 14. You complained your feet couldn't reach the floor." Cedric almost smiled. "I did. You kicked them anyway." The memory struck harder than expected. For one impossible instant, he wasn't king. He was simply the younger brother following Alaric through endless palace corridors. Then the moment passed. Oswin bowed. "Rest, Your Majesty." After he left, Cedric remained alone. That evening, he wandered through the palace without guards. He did this often. Most people assumed he enjoyed solitude. The truth was simpler. He liked hearing the castle breathe. A maid laughed somewhere down the corridor. Someone was practicing the violin in a distant chamber. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread. Life continued, as it should. Yet every familiar sound reminded him who had once filled these halls with easy warmth. He paused outside the old training courtyard. The wooden practice swords were still there, scarred, well used. He remembered losing every sparring match until he was 16. Alaric never mocked him. Instead, he always offered the same advice. "Strength isn't winning every fight, it's standing up after every loss." Cedric whispered into the empty courtyard. "You should have chosen someone else to teach." The wind carried away the words. Near sunset, he entered the royal archives. Most kings rarely visited. Cedric came every week, not for history, for one shelf. It held journals written by generations of Wintermere rulers. Alaric's journal rested there, bound in dark blue leather, untouched since the day he left for the northern campaign. Cedric reached toward it. His hand stopped halfway. He had never opened it, not once. He couldn't explain why. Perhaps he feared finding forgiveness. Perhaps he feared finding disappointment. Some truths were heavier than ignorance. He withdrew his hand. "Your Majesty." Cedric turned. Captain Hollis stood in the doorway. His armor still bore the silver wolf of House Wintermere. He had refused every request to replace it. "You asked to see me," Cedric nodded. I did. Hollis waited. Cedric searched for the right words. They've arrived. The young woman from Hollowmere. They have. Has she been treated well? Hollis looked surprised. Very well. Cedric nodded once. Good. Silence stretched. Hollis studied him carefully. There is something else. Cedric looked up. The palace smiled today. The words seemed almost unbelievable. The kitchens laughed. Lady Agnes laughed. Lily burned the morning biscuits. Cedric blinked. Lily? She insisted they were only lightly overcooked. They were charcoal. Against his will, Cedric laughed. A real laugh, brief, almost forgotten. Hollis smiled faintly. I hadn't heard that sound in a long time. The laughter faded. Night settled quietly over Frosthold. Wrapped in a dark cloak, Cedric left the palace through a hidden gate known only to the royal family. His horse followed a narrow forest path. No guards, just a man riding alone beneath the moon. After nearly an hour, he reached the Valley of Kings. Snow covered ancient stone monuments. The wind whispered through towering pines. At the center stood the newest memorial, a great marble tomb. Upon it were carved the words, Alaric Wintermere, beloved king, faithful protector. Cedric stood motionless before it. I keep trying, his voice barely carried, to rule the way you did. The silence answered. I preserved your laws, I protected your people, I even left your throne beside mine. His shoulders sagged, but none of it changes. He looked at the stone. What I did, for the first time in 3 years, the king of Wintermere knelt, not before a court, not before a kingdom, but before the memory of his brother. I don't know how to carry this anymore. A twig snapped in the darkness. Cedric rose instantly, hand on his sword. Who's there? No answer, only the wind, hidden among the trees. A hooded figure watched until Cedric mounted his horse and disappeared into the night. Only then did the stranger step toward the tomb. Moonlight caught a weathered hand. The figure knelt, touched the cold stone, and quietly whispered, So, the wolf is still remembered, then vanished back into the forest before dawn. Chapter 9. The Man Without a Name. The Black Fortress did not ask prisoners who they had been. It only cared who they became. Each dawn, iron bells shattered the silence. Each morning, prisoners left their cells with numbers instead of names. Each evening, they returned with bodies a little weaker than the day before. 3 winters had passed. The fortress had forgotten many faces, but it had not forgotten prisoner 27. Not because he fought, not because he complained, because no matter how heavy the labor, he somehow noticed when someone else carried a heavier burden. The morning whistle echoed across the quarry. Snow covered everything. Stone, chains, shoulders, hope. Captain Victor watched from the eastern wall. He had served under Lord Malrec for almost 15 years. He understood every order his commander had ever given, except one. Prisoner 27, no record, no family, no rank, no crime, just 27. Yet Malrec inspected his work personally, twice a week, sometimes more. It made no sense. Below, a prisoner slipped while dragging a cart loaded with granite. The wheel struck his ankle. He cried out. Before the guards reacted, 27 was already there. Don't move. The injured man gritted his teeth. I'll slow everyone down. You'll heal slower if you pretend you aren't hurt, without asking permission. Alaric lifted the front of the cart. Another prisoner immediately grabbed the rear. Then another. Within seconds, 5 men carried the load together. No one had spoken, no one had planned it. They simply followed the example already set. Captain Victor narrowed his eyes. Interesting. Lord Malrec arrived shortly afterward. His black cloak moved through the falling snow like a shadow. He surveyed the worksite. Report. The eastern wall is ahead of schedule. The southern quarry has begun freezing. And? Captain Victor hesitated. Prisoner 27. What about him? The others. They're changing. Malrec said nothing. They work together now. They share food. They settle disputes without fighting. Victor frowned. I've never seen prisoners behave like this. Malrek's gaze drifted toward Alaric. He reminded them, they are still men. The answer only deepened Victor's confusion. That afternoon, the prisoners were given their single bowl of stew, thin, mostly water. One elderly prisoner quietly pushed his bowl away. My teeth, he whispered. I can't chew. Without hesitation, Alaric broke his own bread into smaller pieces, soaked them until they softened, then placed the bowl gently in front of the old man. There, the prisoner stared. You'll be hungry. I've been hungry before. The old man lowered his eyes. No one has done something kind for me. Since I arrived. Alaric smiled faintly. Then today was overdue. Several prisoners watched without speaking. Kindness spread strangely in places built for despair. That evening, Captain Victor entered Lord Malrek's office, carrying a leather ledger. I've reviewed the prisoner reports. Malrek continued reading dispatches. And there is still no official identity recorded for 27. No, there isn't. Victor shifted uneasily. My lord, if he is only another soldier, why erase his past? Silence filled the room. The fireplace cracked softly. Finally, Malrek stood. He walked to the window overlooking the prison yard. Snow covered the empty worksite. The dead deserve names. His voice remained calm. The living earn them. Victor frowned. I don't understand. I know. Malrek looked toward the mountains beyond the fortress walls. And for now, at his best, 3 days later, a rider arrived beneath a banner bearing the royal crest of Valinor. The guards immediately opened the gates. Captain Victor recognized the seal at once. The capital, the messenger carried a scroll marked with crimson wax. For Lord Malrek. No one else was permitted to read it. Inside the command chamber, Malrek broke the seal. The letter bore the signature of King Edric Valinor, ruler of the Kingdom of Valinor. It was brief, direct. Reports speak of a prisoner whose continued survival has become unusual. I expect an explanation. If the captive serves no strategic purpose, end the matter. No greeting, no farewell, only command. Malrek folded the parchment. His expression revealed nothing. Captain Victor waited. Your orders, my lord? Malrek looked toward the prison yard below. Prisoner 27 was helping 2 exhausted men lift frozen timber. Not because he had to, but because they could not. Increase the watch. Victor blinked. My lord, no one approaches 27 without my permission. The king requested an explanation. He will receive one. And if His Majesty orders the prisoner's execution, for a long moment, Malrek said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the lone prisoner moving through the snow. Then he answered quietly. Then I will answer to my king myself. Captain Victor left with more questions than he had brought. Behind him, Malrek opened a small iron chest hidden beneath his desk. Inside rested only one object. A silver signet ring, its wolf crest caught the firelight. He closed the lid without touching it, locked it again, and whispered to the empty room, Not yet. Chapter 10. A promise kept. 3 mornings had passed since Evangeline arrived at Frosthold. The palace had begun to feel less overwhelming. She no longer lost her way through the endless corridors. She recognized the servants who greeted her with gentle smiles. She had even learned when the winter sunlight reached the eastern gardens. Yet one feeling refused to fade, the quiet absence of a king she had never met, far away. Hollowmere awakened before dawn. Thomas unlocked the bakery as he always had. He measured flour, lit the ovens, prepared the dough, then simply stood there. His hands refused to move. Miriam entered carrying a pail of fresh milk. You forgot the yeast. I know. You've been staring at that bowl for nearly 10 minutes. Thomas managed a tired smile. The bakery feels too quiet. Miriam set the milk upon the table. It does. Neither of them spoke Evangeline's name. They didn't need to. Her absence had already settled into every corner of the village. Then, a distant horn echoed across the valley. Once, then again. Thomas frowned. Visitors. Miriam stepped outside. Her eyes widened. The sound grew louder. Not one wagon, not two. An entire royal convoy wound its way down the snow-covered road beneath the silver banner of Wintermere. By the time the villagers reached the square, nearly 20 royal wagons stood waiting. Each bore the silver wolf of Wintermere. Children stopped running. Farmers removed their caps. Even Thomas stared in disbelief. Captain Alden, commander of the royal convoy, stepped forward. He unrolled a parchment sealed with blue wax. In the name of His Majesty King Cedric of Wintermere, the Crown now fulfills the pledge made to the people of Hollowmere. No applause followed. Only stunned silence. Then the work began. The first wagons carried grain, enough to fill the village storehouses before another winter could threaten them. The second brought flour. The third carried blankets, warm clothing, medicine, and preserved food. Behind them came blacksmiths, carpenters, stone masons, engineers, not visitors, workers, people sent to rebuild. Captain Alden turned to Thomas. "Show us the damaged bridge." Thomas blinked. "The bridge? It appears on the royal list." He consulted the parchment. "Collapsed footbridge over the eastern stream. Priority, immediate." Thomas's lips parted. Evangeline mentioned it. Captain Alden smiled. She mentioned many things. Within hours, the quiet village became alive with purposeful noise. Hammers rang through the valley. Builders measured cracked cottages. Blacksmiths repaired broken farming tools. The village healer received crates filled with herbs, bandages, and medicines she had only ever read about. An elderly farmer shook his head in disbelief. They remembered everything. They remembered all of it. Sophie wandered among the wagons with wide eyes. One soldier knelt beside her. "Would you like to help?" She nodded eagerly. He handed her a small pouch. Inside were apple seeds. "For the new orchard." She hugged the pouch to her chest. "We're getting an orchard." The soldier smiled. "So I've been told." Near sunset, Eleanor slowly walked to the edge of the village. Workers had already begun repairing her leaking roof. Fresh timber rested beside the cottage. A young carpenter tipped his hat. "We'll finish before tomorrow evening." Eleanor touched the weathered wall. For years she had prayed for one more winter without the roof collapsing. Now, strangers worked as though it were their own home. She looked toward the southern road where Evangeline had disappeared. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek. "You kept your word." Far away, the towers of Frosthold finally appeared above the snow-covered cliffs. Evangeline leaned toward the carriage window. The royal capital rose from the mountains like something carved from winter itself. Silver banners fluttered from ancient walls. Smoke drifted peacefully above warm hearths. It was magnificent and terrifying. Lady Agnes noticed her expression. "It feels very large." "It does," she smiled gently. "So did it to me." As the great gates opened, every guard along the entrance lowered a fist to his chest. Not in celebration, in respect. None of them cheered. None of them stared. They simply honored the young woman who had chosen to bear a burden meant for an entire kingdom. Evangeline lowered her eyes, humbled by a respect she did not feel she had earned. Far beyond the northern mountains, prisoner 27 finished another day in the quarry. One of the younger prisoners collapsed from exhaustion. Without hesitation, Alaric lifted the man's load onto his own shoulders. Captain Victor watched from the wall. "He does it again." Lord Malrec stood beside him. "He always does." Victor frowned. "I've never seen a man give away so much of himself." Malrec's eyes remained fixed on the prisoner. "The strongest men often do, that same night." A rider from the capital entered the Black Fortress at full gallop. The horse was exhausted. The messenger carried the royal seal of King Edric Valinor. Malrec read the letter once, then burned it in the fireplace. Captain Victor stared. "My lord!" Malrec's voice was calm. "The king is coming." Silence filled the room. "When?" Malrec looked toward the prison yard beyond the frost-covered window. "Within days." For the first time in 3 years, even Lord Malrec looked troubled. Chapter 11. The Man Behind the Crown. Morning settled quietly over Frosthold. Sunlight turned the snow-covered rooftops to silver as merchants opened their shops. Children raced through the streets, and soldiers changed the watch. Life had not stopped when the king died. It had simply learned to continue without him. A gentle knock came at Evangeline's door. Lady Agnes entered with a warm smile. "I hope you rested well." "I did. I'm glad." She carried neither scrolls nor lessons, only one question. "Would you walk with me?" They wandered through the palace in comfortable silence. Servants bowed as they passed. Lady Agnes greeted each one by name. "You remember everyone," Evangeline observed. "I learned from someone." After a pause, Agnes added, "His Majesty believed no ruler should ever make people feel invisible." When a new servant arrived, he learned their name, and he never forgot it. She smiled at the memory. A kitchen boy disappeared for 6 months after breaking his arm. The day he returned, His Majesty said, "Welcome back, Rowan. Is your arm finally behaving itself?" Evangeline blinked. He remembered. He remembered everyone. They entered the palace gardens where winter roses bloomed beneath crystal frames. The elderly gardener bowed. "Lady Agnes." "Good morning, Master Rowan." He smiled at Evangeline. "So this is the young lady." "The honor is mine," she replied. Rowan brushed snow from a young apple tree. "The king planted this himself." "The king?" I asked why he was digging in frozen ground, and he said, "I may never enjoy its sweetest fruit, but perhaps a child born after I'm gone will." His weathered hand rested against the trunk. "It blooms every spring." Neither woman spoke. Later, Lady Agnes led her into the royal infirmary. Warm herbs filled the air. The physician smiled. "So you're the brave young woman everyone speaks about." "I don't know about brave," he laughed. "His Majesty used to say the same thing." "You knew him well?" "Better than most. He carefully arranged fresh medicines. Whenever a servant became seriously ill, I could never convince him to leave. He would sit beside their bed until sunrise, but he had a kingdom to govern, so I reminded him, and he answered. The kingdom can wait until morning. A frightened servant should not have to. Silence settled over the room. Elsewhere, Cedric stood alone in his brother's study. Dust had gathered on the old desk. Everything else remained untouched. He rested a hand on Alaric's chair. He could almost hear him say, "Sit down, Cedric. Tell me what you disagree with." They had argued often, not from hatred, but because Alaric believed disagreement made a kingdom wiser. Cedric closed his eyes. "I should have said, thank you." The empty room gave no reply. Far beyond the mountains, iron rang against stone inside the black fortress. 2 prisoners argued over a bucket of water. One reached for a hammer. Before violence could begin, prisoner 27 stepped between them. Without a word, he handed his own water to the older man, then took the heavier workload himself. The fight ended before it began. Captain Victor watched from the wall. "They obey him." Malrec shook his head. "No, they trust him. There is a difference." That afternoon, a black raven arrived bearing King Edric's seal. Malrec read the message and folded it quietly. "My lord?" Victor asked. "King Edric reaches the fortress in 3 days." The room grew colder, and the prisoner Malrec looked toward the prison yard. "Nothing changes." Victor wasn't so certain. As evening settled over Frosthold, Lady Agnes unlocked a small room beside the royal library. "There is one place I wish to show you." Shelves held journals, ledgers, and bundles of carefully tied letters. She handed Evangeline a worn leather notebook. His Majesty carried this everywhere. The first pages contained meetings, harvest reports, and patrol schedules. Then she reached a section titled, Promises. Repair the Eastern Bridge before spring floods. Deliver medicine to Hollowmere before the first snowfall. Visit Widow Eleanor after harvest. Send winter blankets to the northern shepherds. Her breath caught. She knew those names. Those promises, fulfilled only recently, had not begun with Cedric. They had begun with Alaric. He had planned them, written them. Only fate had prevented him from finishing them himself. A tear slipped onto the page. So even after 3 years, you're still keeping your promises? Lady Agnes smiled gently. No. You are helping him keep them. Far away, beneath the darkness of the Black Fortress, Alaric looked toward the southern horizon. He could not know that hundreds of miles away, someone had just discovered the kind of king he had always tried to be. Nor could he know that with every page she turned, Evangeline's heart was quietly choosing a man she had never met. Chapter 12. The Ceremony of the Moon. The palace awoke before sunrise. Not for celebration, for preparation. Servants hurried through the halls carrying silver candlesticks, winter flowers and ceremonial banners. Tailors rushed between chambers while scribes copied invitations. In 3 days, Wintermere would bid farewell to its lost king. Evangeline stood at her window watching snow drift across the gardens, when a gentle knock came. "Come in." Lady Agnes entered carrying a long wooden case. "I've brought something for you." She opened it carefully. Inside lay a gown that shimmered like moonlight on fresh snow. Silver embroidery wove wolves, stars, and winter branches across the fabric. "It belonged to Queen Eloin," Lady Agnes said softly, "the last queen of Wintermere." Evangeline stepped back. I can't wear something so precious." Lady Agnes smiled. "You misunderstand. It was her wish. My lady, Queen Eloin once told me, if another woman ever wears this gown, let it be someone chosen for her heart." Silence settled between them. Lady Agnes gently closed the case. "I believe Her Majesty would have approved." Far beyond the mountains, the gates of the Black Fortress opened. A column of armored riders entered beneath black banners. Lord Malrec descended the steps alone. The riders parted. King Edric Valinor emerged wearing a black wolf fur cloak, his silver crown gleaming beneath the winter sky. His eyes swept across the fortress before settling on Malrec. "You've kept me waiting. My king, I trust my prisoner has finally become useful." Malrec chose his words carefully. "He has remained exactly as I reported." Edric smiled. "I prefer seeing things for myself. For the first time in years." Concern flickered across Malrec's face. Deep beneath the fortress, Alaric repaired a broken cartwheel beside the other prisoners. A young prisoner whispered, "They say the king is here. Alaric never stopped working." "Then keep your head down." The boy nodded. "You always know what to do." A tired smile crossed Alaric's face. "No, I've simply made enough mistakes to recognize danger." That afternoon, Evangeline wandered into the palace chapel. Sunlight poured through stained glass depicting generations of Wintermere's rulers, warriors, queens, children, scholars. Then she reached the final window. King Alaric. One hand rested on a child's shoulder. The other held an olive branch instead of a sword. She stood there quietly. He never wanted to be remembered for war. The palace chaplain had approached without her noticing. He insisted on that design himself. Evangeline smiled. "That sounds like him." The chaplain looked surprised. "You speak as though you knew him." She lowered her eyes. "No, I only know the kindness he left behind." That evening, King Edric inspected the prison. Rows of prisoners stood motionless as he walked between them. Alaric kept his eyes lowered. Just another forgotten man. Edric stopped before an elderly prisoner struggling to stand. "That one," Captain Victor stiffened. "My king?" He slows production. Edric drew his sword. Before anyone could move, Alaric stepped forward. "My king." The prison yard fell silent. "He is ill. I will complete his work." Edric slowly turned toward him. A curious request. He glanced at Malrec. "Does this one always speak for others?" Before Malrec answered, Victor quietly said, "He always works for them." Edric smiled, a dangerous smile. "Interesting." He sheathed his sword. The old man lives. His gaze never left Alaric. But I wish to know more about this prisoner. Something cold settled in Malrec's chest. The moment he had feared for 3 years had finally arrived. That night, a lone owl crossed the winter sky between 2 kingdoms. In Frosthold, candles were lit for the coming moon ceremony. In the Black Fortress, King Edric summoned Lord Malrec to a private meeting at dawn. One kingdom prepared to honor its dead. The other stood on the edge of discovering that its greatest prisoner had never truly been lost. Chapter 13. The Price of Mercy. Morning broke cold over the Black Fortress. No bells rang, no horn sounded, only the crack of a guard's staff against frozen stone. Up. Iron doors groaned open as prisoners filed silently into the yard. No one looked toward the royal quarters. No one needed to. King Edric was still inside the fortress. His shadow reached farther than its walls. Alaric joined the work line without complaint. The elderly prisoner whose life he had saved the day before struggled beneath his load, hands shaking with cold. Without a word, Alaric shifted half the stones into his own cart. The old man looked at him. "You'll be punished." Alaric smiled faintly. "Then work a little slower." The old prisoner's eyes glistened. "You don't even know my name. I don't need to—" High above the quarry, King Edric watched from a balcony. For several moments he said nothing. Then he nodded toward Alaric. "That one." Malrec remained expressionless. "Prisoner 27. He interests me. He has unusual discipline," Malrec answered carefully. "Some men survive by serving others." Edric gave a quiet laugh. "No. They survive by making others serve them." His eyes never left Alaric. "I intend to discover which kind he is." Back in Frosthold, preparations for the moon ceremony continued. Guests arrived from every corner of Wintermere. Noble banners flew beside those of humble villages. Cedric had made no distinction. Alaric never had. From a balcony, Evangeline watched families embrace below. Lady Agnes joined her. "Nervous? A little. There are so many people. They didn't come merely for a ceremony." Agnes smiled gently. "They came to say goodbye." That afternoon, Captain Hollis guided Evangeline through the Hall of Kings. Portraits of rulers lined the chamber. Warriors, queens, children, reformers. They stopped before Alaric's. Unlike the others, he wasn't seated upon a throne. He stood beside villagers rebuilding a bridge, his cloak stained with mud, while a little girl laughed nearby. Evangeline smiled. "This doesn't look like a king." Hollis chuckled. "It doesn't." He insisted. When the painter asked how he wished to be remembered, he said, "As someone my people weren't afraid to interrupt." The court hated that answer. I loved it. Far away, the prison bell rang again. Not for work, for judgment. 3 prisoners were dragged into the yard. One had stolen bread. One had struck a guard. One had tried to escape. King Edric watched as sentences were passed without hesitation. 20 lashes, 40 lashes, execution. The condemned prisoner collapsed. "No. Please." The yard fell silent. Alaric's hands tightened. Every instinct demanded he step forward. But if he revealed himself now, every prisoner who depended on him would suffer. Every hope of returning home would die. For the first time in 3 years, mercy required him to do nothing. It was the hardest command he had ever obeyed. Late that evening, Malrec entered the prison alone. He stopped outside cell 27. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Malrec said quietly, "You still carry yourself like a king." Alaric smiled wearily. "I carry stones." "No, you carry responsibility." Silence lingered. Malrec slipped a bundle of dried herbs through the bars. For your hands, the skin across Alaric's palms had split from endless labor. He accepted them with a quiet nod. "Thank you." Malrec turned to leave, then paused. "The world believes you're dead." Alaric's voice remained calm. "Some days." "So do I." For the first time, Malrec closed his eyes. not because he pitied the prisoner, but because 3 years earlier he had chosen to let him live. Every day since he had wondered whether that single decision would one day save 2 kingdoms, or destroy them both. Snow fell over both Wintermere and the Black Fortress. One kingdom prepared candles to mourn its lost king. The other unknowingly guarded the very man they intended to honor. Neither realized. The moon ceremony was only 2 days away. Chapter 14. The king who was never forgotten. 2 days remained before the moon ceremony. Wintermere stirred long before sunrise. Roads leading to Frosthold filled with travelers carrying lanterns against the morning snow. Some came on horseback, others arrived in wagons, many simply walked, not because the crown had summoned them, because they wished to come. The palace kitchens had never been busier. Bread disappeared from ovens almost as quickly as it was baked. Soup simmered in great iron pots. Servants hurried between tables preparing meals for guests who continued arriving by the hour. Evangeline paused in the doorway. She smiled. "It smells like Hollowmere." The head cook laughed. "The late king insisted the palace should smell like fresh bread whenever possible." She looked surprised. "Why?" The woman kneaded another loaf before answering. He said, "If a palace smells only of perfume, its rulers have forgotten ordinary people." Evangeline smiled to herself. Another small piece of the man she had never met. Outside, Captain Hollis inspected the growing crowds. Village elders stood beside merchants. Shepherds shared fires with minor nobles. No one had been turned away. A young guard approached. "I've never seen so many people inside the capital." Hollis watched an elderly couple carrying winter flowers toward the palace gates. "They're not here because they were ordered. They're here because someone once mattered to them." Across the mountains, the Black Fortress stood beneath a sky heavy with snow. King Edric walked the prison yard without an escort. The prisoners immediately lowered their heads. Everyone except one. Not from defiance, from habit. Alaric remained focused on repairing a broken wagon axle. Edric stopped beside him. "You," Alaric rose respectfully. "My king, you repaired this?" "Yes." Edric examined the wheel. "You were not trained as a carpenter?" "No." "A blacksmith?" "No." "What were you before this?" A long pause followed. Alaric answered simply, "A man with responsibilities." Edric studied him. It was an ordinary reply, yet something about it lingered. He turned and walked away without another word. Captain Victor released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That evening, Cedric visited the royal chapel alone. No attendants followed him, no guards interrupted, only silence. He knelt before the ancient moon altar. "I don't know whether you can hear me." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I've tried to rule as you would have. I've failed more often than I've succeeded." He closed his eyes. "I only wish I could have told you that while you were alive." A single candle flickered, nothing more. Yet somehow, the silence felt less empty. Far away, Alaric entered his private war room. A map of the northern kingdoms covered one wall. Wintermere, Valinor, the border rivers, mountain passes, supply roads. His gaze settled on one narrow blue line, the Frost River, the place where he had found the unconscious king 3 years ago. For a long moment, he simply looked at it. Then he rolled the map closed as footsteps approached. Captain Victor entered. "My lord, the king wishes to inspect the records tomorrow." Malrek nodded once. "I expected as much. Should I prepare the prison register?" A brief silence. "Yes." "And prisoner 27? Malrek's expression revealed nothing. "Treat him as every other prisoner, no more, no less. Back in Frosthold." Night settled softly across the palace. Deep within the Black Fortress, Alaric sat alone in his cell. The wind slipped through the narrow window. He looked at the stars. 3 winters, 3 springs, 3 summers, 3 autumns. He had stopped counting the days, yet tonight, for reasons he couldn't explain, home felt close, not in distance, in memory. He whispered a prayer he had spoken every night since the river carried him away. Keep them safe. He never asked for rescue, never asked for revenge, only that Wintermere might endure without him. The same moon rose above both kingdoms. In Frosthold, thousands prepared to honor a king they believed they had lost. In the Black Fortress, that king still prayed for them. Neither knew that destiny had only one more day to wait. Chapter 15. Beneath the Same Moon. The morning of the moon ceremony dawned clear, for the first time in many days. The sky above Frosthold held no snow. It was as though winter itself had paused to watch. Before sunrise, the bells of the capital rang, not in celebration, in remembrance. Their deep voices rolled across the city, over rooftops, across frozen rivers, and into valleys where farmers stopped their work and bowed their heads. Every bell carried the same message. The kingdom remembers. By the time the palace gates opened, thousands had gathered outside. Some carried white winter roses, others held simple lanterns. Many brought nothing except their memories. No one shouted, no musicians played. The silence itself had become an act of respect. Inside the palace, Lady Agnes fastened the final clasp at the back of Evangeline's ceremonial gown. Neither woman spoke for a while. Finally Agnes whispered, "You still have time." Evangeline looked at her reflection. "To change my mind? If your heart tells you to." Evangeline was quiet. Then she smiled gently. "My heart brought me here." Agnes reached for her hand. "Then may it never leave you." Elsewhere, Cedric stood alone before the doors of the Hall of Kings. Captain Hollis approached. "The people are ready," Cedric nodded. "And my brother?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Hollis lowered his eyes. "As ready as we can make him." Cedric closed his eyes briefly. Then he opened the great doors, far beyond the northern mountains. The Black Fortress awoke beneath the same pale sunlight. King Edric entered the record hall. Ancient ledgers lined the walls. He ran a gloved finger across one shelf. "I dislike missing pieces." Malrek remained still. "There are none." Edric looked toward him. "Then show me the prison register." A clerk hurried forward. Leather-bound books were placed upon the table, page after page, year after year, names, crimes, sentences. Edric turned each page slowly. His patience was far more frightening than anger. Then he stopped. One entry. No name, only a number. Prisoner 27. He read the record once, then again. His eyes narrowed. No name. Malrek answered evenly. The prisoner was found without identification. Edric's gaze lingered on the page. 3 years. No family, no origin, no investigation. He closed the ledger. Curious outside. Captain Victor felt the cold settle deeper into his bones. He had served Malrek for nearly 20 years. He had never seen his commander so still, not during battles, not during sieges, not even when defeat seemed certain. Today, silence itself had become dangerous. In Frosthold, the procession began. The great doors opened. Evangeline stepped forward. Her gown shimmered softly beneath the winter light. Not extravagant, not proud, simply graceful. The gathered crowd lowered their heads as she passed, not because she was a queen, not yet, but because they understood what she was choosing. She walked slowly through the Hall of Kings. Portrait after portrait watched in silence. At the end of the hall rested the silver coffin of King Alaric, covered in white winter lilies, the same empty coffin buried 3 years ago. Only a handful of people knew that to everyone else. Their king had finally come home. The High Elder began the ancient prayers. Candles were lit one by one. The scent of pine and cedar drifted through the hall. Every voice remained hushed. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. Evangeline stood before the coffin. She rested one hand gently upon the polished silver. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I never knew you." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But I've come to know your kindness." She closed her eyes. I promise. To protect the people you loved. Across the hall, Lady Agnes quietly wept. Captain Hollis bowed his head. Even Cedric could no longer hide the grief in his eyes. At that same moment, in the Black Fortress, King Edric closed the prison register. He looked directly at Malrek. I wish to question prisoner 27. The words struck the room like thunder, for the first time. Malrek answered without hesitation, no. Silence. Captain Victor stared in disbelief. No one had ever refused King Edric so directly. Edric's expression hardened. Was that defiance? Malrek met his eyes. It was a request. Edric stepped closer. I did not ask for one. The room fell utterly silent. Then the iron door to cell 27 swung open. 2 royal guards stepped inside. By order of King Edric, you will come with us. Alaric slowly rose. He looked once toward the narrow window where moonlight touched the stone floor. Then he followed them into the darkness. Neither he nor Evangeline knew that before another moonrise, their destinies would begin to collide. Chapter 16. The King Without a Name. Moonlight poured through the stained glass windows of Frosthold Palace. The Hall of Kings stood silent. Hundreds of candles flickered around the silver coffin. The High Elder raised the ancient Book of the Moon. The hour has come. No one moved. Every heart in the hall seemed to beat together. Evangeline stepped forward. The white winter rose in her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from the weight of the promise she was about to make. She looked at the silver coffin. You gave everything for people you never stopped believing in. Her voice barely carried beyond the first rows. I cannot promise to become as great as you. A tear slipped down her cheek. But I promise, I will never let your kindness be forgotten. She laid the rose gently upon the coffin. The hall remained utterly still. Far away, the iron doors of the Black Fortress closed behind prisoner 27. King Edric waited alone inside the old audience chamber. Lord Malrek stood nearby. Captain Victor remained by the entrance. No one spoke. Edric slowly circled the prisoner. You have spent 3 years without telling anyone your name, Alaric answered quietly. No one asked. A faint smile crossed Edric's face. A dangerous sense of humor. He stopped. You carry yourself like a commander. I once carried responsibility. So you said. Edric studied the scars on Alaric's hands. Not the hands of a common criminal. The hands of a swordsman forced into labor. Where did you learn to lead men? Alaric looked directly at him. By serving them first. The answer lingered in the room. Edric had heard words like those before. Long ago. From another king. In Frosthold, the High Elder began the ancient vows. They who stand beneath the moon, do so not to bind the dead, but to strengthen the living. Cedric lowered his head. Lady Agnes quietly wiped away another tear. Captain Hollis stood as motionless as stone. Outside, thousands waited in respectful silence. Back inside the Black Fortress, Edric walked to the fireplace. Without looking at Malrek, he spoke. Bring me the sealed chest. Captain Victor frowned. My king? The one found with the river prisoner. The room froze. Very slowly, Malrek met Edric's eyes. For the first time in 3 years, the secret had reached its end, without argument. He crossed the room, unlocked an old iron chest, lifted out a cloth bundle. He placed it upon the table. Edric unfolded it carefully. A torn royal cloak, a broken sword belt, then a silver ring, the Wolf of Wintermere, the royal signet, silence. Edric picked it up. His eyes moved from the ring to the prisoner, back to the ring, again. Captain Victor's breathing slowed. He suddenly understood. Not because anyone had spoken, because every impossible piece finally fit together. Edric's voice became almost a whisper. The Wolf King. He stepped closer. No. The King of Wintermere. The room seemed to lose all warmth. Alaric said nothing. There was nothing left to deny. Edric turned toward Malrek. You knew. It wasn't a question. Malrek answered steadily. Yes, you found him. Yes, you hid him. Yes, you lied to your king. For 3 years. The words echoed through the chamber. Captain Victor slowly lowered his eyes. The truth was finally spoken aloud. At that same moment, in Frosthold, the High Elder placed the ceremonial ribbon into Evangeline's hands. Do you freely accept this sacred duty? Every face turned toward her. She looked once more at the coffin, then toward the people filling the hall. The kingdom, the children, the elders, the villagers, everyone who still believed their king had died for them. She answered with quiet certainty, I do. As the words left her lips, the moon gate blazed with silver light. A wind swept through the hall, though every door remained closed. The candles danced. The ancient stone seemed to awaken. The gathered crowd gasped. Even the High Elder looked astonished. No ceremony in living memory had answered so strongly. Hundreds of miles away, at that exact moment, the silver signet ring slipped from Edric's fingers. It struck the stone floor. The sound echoed like a bell. Edric looked from the ring to the prisoner before him. Then he laughed, not with joy, with disbelief. The world buried you. His smile faded. And yet, you've been alive beneath my own roof. He slowly drew his sword. Captain Victor's hand tightened around his spear. Malrek did not move. Alaric stood quietly. No crown, no armor, no title. Only a man who had endured 3 impossible years. Edric lifted the blade. Tell me, King Alaric. His eyes burned with dangerous curiosity. Why shouldn't I finish what the river failed to do? The chamber fell silent. No one breathed. And for the first time since the frozen river carried him away, the dead king finally spoke his name. I am Alaric of Wintermere. The words rang through the chamber, like thunder after a long winter. Chapter 17. The last night of prisoner 27. No one slept inside the Black Fortress. Not the guards, not the prisoners, not the king. By sunrise, nothing would remain the same. King Edric stood alone in the highest tower. The silver signet ring rested upon the table before him. Its wolf crest caught the firelight. For 3 years, the greatest prize in the northern kingdoms had lived beneath his own fortress, hidden, forgotten, protected by the one man he trusted most. He laughed once, quietly. Not because anything was amusing, because fate had mocked them all. A knock came. Enter. Lord Malrek stepped inside. The door closed behind him. Neither man spoke immediately. Edric finally broke the silence. 3 years. Yes, you watched him every day. Yes, and every day. You lied to not deny it. Edric walked slowly around the room. I have fought Wintermere for 20 years. I studied their generals, I learned their borders, I memorized their weaknesses. He stopped beside the window and all that time. Their king was eating prison bread beneath my own roof. He turned. Tell me why. Malrek answered without hesitation. Because if the world learned he had survived, war would have begun before winter ended. Edric's eyes narrowed. You presume to decide matters of war? I decided matters of survival. For whom? A long silence followed. Finally, Malrek answered truthfully. For everyone. Edric's jaw tightened. You imprisoned one king. To save 2 kingdoms, I believed it was the lesser evil. And now? Malrek looked directly at him. I no longer know. Far below, the prison whispered with rumors. Every cell carried a different story. They say 27 is a king. They say he led armies. They say he killed 100 men. They say he escaped death itself. Alaric listened without speaking. An elderly prisoner sat beside him. You should have told us. Alaric smiled faintly. What would it have changed? The old man thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. Nothing. You still shared your bread. You still carried my stones. You still buried my friends. He looked at Alaric. You were our king long before we knew your name. The words settled heavily between them. In Frosthold, the moon ceremony had ended. The people remained gathered outside the palace. Candles illuminated every street. Children placed white flowers beneath the statue of King Alaric. Evangeline watched from a balcony. Lady Agnes joined her. They loved him. Agnes smiled gently, they still do. Evangeline looked across the sea of lights. I wish, she hesitated. I wish I could have met him. Agnes followed her gaze. So do I. Neither woman knew that the man they mourned had just reclaimed his name. Before dawn, King Edric entered the prison yard. A platform had been built overnight. Every prisoner was forced into the courtyard. Every guard stood armed. Snow drifted through the bitter air. Edric stepped onto the platform. His voice carried across the fortress. We found an unnamed man beneath the Frost River. He concealed his identity. He deceived this fortress. He looked directly at Alaric. No longer the king drew the silver signet ring from his cloak. He held it high. This man is King of Wintermere. A wave of disbelief swept through the prisoners. No one spoke. No one moved. The old prisoner beside Alaric slowly whispered, You. Alaric met his eyes. I was. Around the yard, men who had survived 3 years beside prisoner 27 looked at him differently. Not with fear, not with distance, with understanding. Everything they had admired suddenly made sense. Edric raised his hand for silence. Tomorrow, the Wolf King will fight, not as a king, not as an honored prisoner, as a condemned man. If he survives, I may grant him another sunrise. If he falls, the northern kingdoms will witness the end of their legend. His gaze swept across the prisoners, and every one of you will remember what happens to those who defy me. The fortress fell silent. Snow continued to fall. No cheers, no laughter, no celebration. Only the quiet certainty that tomorrow would decide the fate of kings. That night, Captain Victor made his final inspection. He stopped outside Alaric's cell. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Victor asked, Were you truly their king? Alaric nodded once. Yes. Victor looked down the corridor toward the sleeping prisoners. They followed you without knowing. Alaric's answer came softly. People should never need a crown to recognize kindness. Victor stood in silence. Then, without another word, he walked away. For the first time since entering the fortress years ago, he wasn't sure which king deserved his loyalty. Far above, Lord Mulrek stood alone on the western wall. Beyond the mountains lay Wintermere. Beyond the prison lay a choice he could no longer postpone. The wind carried snow across the battlements. He closed his hand around the empty space where the royal signet ring had rested for 3 years. Tomorrow, history would judge every decision he had made. Chapter 18. The Wolf King unleashed. Dawn broke beneath an iron-grey sky. Snow swept across the towers of the Black Fortress. Every bell rang, not for worship, not for victory, for judgment. The fortress courtyard had become an arena. Thousands gathered, soldiers lined the walls, archers filled every tower. Shackled prisoners crowded the lower stands. At the center stood one man, bareheaded, unarmored, clothed only in a worn prison tunic. Alaric. For 3 years he had been prisoner 27. Today, the world would remember the Wolf King. King Edric rose from the royal platform. You stand accused of deceiving this kingdom. You stand accused of concealing your identity. You stand accused of being King Alaric of Wintermere. He smiled. You may defend yourself. A murmur swept through the arena. If you defeat my champions, you earn another sunrise. If you fall, the legend dies today. The first champion strode forward, wielding a massive warhammer. He laughed at Alaric's empty hands. This is your king? The hammer crashed down. Stone shattered. Alaric slipped aside with inches to spare. 3 years of prison had weakened his body, but not his instincts. The giant swung again, missed. A third strike buried the hammer in the frozen earth. Alaric stepped inside his reach. One sharp blow shattered the man's grip. Another struck behind the knee. The champion collapsed. Alaric stepped back. "I yield you your life." Silence spread. He could have killed him. He chose mercy. Edric's smile faded. Next, the second champion entered with twin swords, young, fast, relentless. Steel flashed through the icy air. A blade sliced across Alaric's shoulder. Blood stained the snow. The prisoners gasped. For the first time, they saw their king bleed. Alaric steadied his breathing. Pain sharpened his focus. The young warrior lunged again, too fast, too certain. Alaric caught his wrist, twisted, and sent one sword spinning away. A single strike with a hilt ended the fight. Again, he spared his opponent. Whispers spread through the fortress. He lets them live. Why? Captain Victor glanced toward Malrek. "He still refuses unnecessary death." Malrek nodded. "He always has." Edric slammed a fist against the railing. All of them. The arena froze. "My king?" Victor asked. "Send every champion." The gates thundered open. 1, 2, 5, 10. 12 elite warriors entered together. Even the prisoners fell silent. No man could survive this. They attacked from every direction. Alaric seized a discarded spear. Steel clashed, wood splintered. Every movement became pure survival. A thrust, a parry, a shoulder strike, a kick. His wounds screamed beneath the effort. A blade slashed across his ribs. A shield smashed into his back. He staggered. The crowd erupted. For one terrifying moment, the legend seemed ready to fall. Then the prisoners found their voices. 27! Our king, stand! The cry rolled across the arena, not from subjects, but from men who had survived because he had shared their bread, their burdens, and their hope. Alaric looked toward them. For 3 years he had believed he had nothing left to lead. He was wrong. He rose. Not because his strength returned, because his purpose did. His movements grew calmer, sharper. He redirected one champion into another, used the arena walls, forced 12 warriors to hinder one another. Experience defeated strength, one by one. Weapons struck the snow. One by one, the champions yielded. Not one lay dead. The arena stood in stunned silence. Edric's restraint shattered. "No more games." He pointed his sword. "Kill him!" Chaos exploded. Archers released their arrows. Guards stormed the arena. Prisoners hurled themselves against their chains. Captain Victor shouted orders no one could hear. An arrow streaked toward the elderly prisoner who had shared Alaric's cell. Without hesitation, Alaric stepped into its path. The arrow buried itself in his side. He dropped to one knee. The old prisoner cried, "Why?" Alaric snapped the shaft. "Because." No king watches another man die in his place. A thunderous crack echoed through the fortress. The western prison gate burst open. Freedom stood waiting. Across the yard, Malrek remained motionless. He gave no order, but neither did he command the gate to be closed. Captain Victor looked from the open gate to his commander. He understood. Without a word, he redirected his soldiers toward the eastern wall, creating just enough confusion, just enough time. Across the battlefield, Alaric met Malrek's eyes. No gratitude, no anger, only mutual respect, one warrior acknowledging another. Alaric lifted the wounded old prisoner onto his shoulder. The prisoners surged toward the western passage. Some carried the injured, some fought, some fell. Not because they were ordered, because one man had shown them what a king truly was. As Alaric reached the ancient stone bridge beyond the gate, horns thundered throughout the fortress. Behind him, King Edric's furious roar shook the walls. After him, snow swirled across the gorge. The bridge vanished into white. Alaric never looked back. For the first time in 3 years, the Wolf King was running. Chapter 19. The Road That Remembered. The western gate vanished behind a curtain of snow. No one looked back, not because they weren't afraid, because every second mattered. Alaric led 15 escaped prisoners into the Whitefang Mountains. Some limped, Others leaned on rough staffs. Two supported the elderly prisoner whose heart had nearly failed during the escape. They were exhausted. No one complained. Behind them, the horns of the Black Fortress echoed again and again. The hunt had begun. King Edric stood atop the western wall, fury burning in his eyes. "Seal every pass. Search every valley. I want every rider in the saddle before the hour is out." Captain Victor bowed. "It will be done." Edric's voice turned cold. "Bring me the Wolf King. Alive." He wanted no martyr, only victory. Below, Lord Malrek watched the cavalry prepare. "My lord?" an officer asked. "The northern pass or the eastern trail?" Malrek studied the mountains before answering. "The eastern trail." After the officer departed, Victor frowned. "The eastern trail?" "The king gave an order," Malrek replied. "Yes, but not that order." He folded the map. "The mountains decide more battles than kings." Understanding dawned. The eastern trail was longer, harsher, and would delay the pursuit by precious hours. Malrek had not disobeyed. He had simply obeyed. Slowly. The White Fang Mountains welcomed no one. Snow buried ancient paths, ice-coated narrow ledges. Every breath stole strength. One prisoner stumbled, another caught him. No one would be left behind. Alaric made certain of it. By midday they reached a frozen stream. The elderly prisoner collapsed. "I can't. I've walked far enough." Alaric knelt beside him. "You'll walk farther." The old man managed a weak laugh. "You've always been stubborn. I learned from old men." Soft laughter warmed the bitter air. It lasted only a moment. Fresh hoofprints appeared behind them. "They're gaining," one of the younger escapees whispered. Alaric surveyed the valley, too open. His eyes lifted to the cliffs above. "We climb." Together they reached the summit. Far below, Edric's cavalry thundered through the valley, never once looking upward. The prisoners exchanged stunned glances. Their king had outthought an army. Night settled over the mountains. A small fire flickered beneath an overhanging cliff. At last the youngest escapee spoke. "Your Majesty." Alaric looked up. "May I still call you 27? Gentle laughter echoed among the rocks. Alaric smiled. "I've answered to both." The boy nodded. 27 saved my life." "So did the king," another man said. The old prisoner gazed into the flames. "They're the same man." No one argued. The silence that followed was no longer born of fear. It was earned. Far away, Frosthold settled into another winter evening. Evangeline carried fresh bread through the infirmary, greeting wounded soldiers with warm smiles. One young guard accepted a loaf. "I never imagined a queen would become our baker." She laughed softly. "I was a baker long before anyone called me Your Majesty. I hope you never stop." As she continued down the corridor, Lady Agnes watched quietly from the doorway. The castle no longer felt haunted. It finally felt like home again. Near midnight, the fugitives reached the highest ridge of the White Fang Range. Beyond it, the mountains descended toward Wintermere. Alaric stopped. Moonlight revealed distant watchfires burning across the horizon. Home. 3 endless years had lived inside that single word. A prisoner stepped beside him. "Is that—" Alaric nodded. "My kingdom." There was no pride in his voice, only longing. The moment shattered. An arrow buried itself in the snow, then another. They're on the ridge. Edric's riders had found them." Alaric calmly snapped the broken arrow shaft still lodged in his side and faced the frightened men beside him. "The border is 1 mile away." His gaze swept across the brothers he had found in prison. "We go together." Behind them, dozens of torches climbed the mountain. Ahead, the lights of Wintermere burned like distant stars. The hardest mile had only just begun. Before dawn, a border horn echoed through the White Fang Mountains. 6 Wintermere Rangers emerged from the pines and confronted 16 ragged men shielding a single wounded figure. The captain raised his sword. "Identify yourselves. Silence." "They're from the Black Fortress." "Hold your ground!" The escaped prisoners tightened their formation, stolen swords rising together. An elderly man stepped forward. "We seek no fight. We seek home." "Who leads you?" Every eye turned to the bloodied man at their center, barely standing despite the arrow lodged in his side. The old prisoner answered quietly, "Our king." The captain frowned. "Wintermere buried its king 3 years ago. You buried an empty coffin." The wounded man lifted his head. His face had changed, his eyes had not. Then came the whisper, "Captain, how fares Wheatfang past this winter?" The captain's sword fell into the snow. Only one king had ever asked that. He dropped to both knees. "Your Majesty." One after another, the rangers removed their helmets and knelt before the man they had mourned for 3 long years. Not because he wore a crown, but because suffering had never changed the king they had sworn to follow. "My king," the captain whispered, tears filling his eyes, "we never stopped searching." A weary smile touched Alaric's lips. "I know." His strength finally failed, but the old prisoner caught him. "Easy, you've carried us long enough." The prisoners lowered their swords. Their king was home. The rangers rushed forward with horses and sleds. The captain wrapped his own winter cloak around Alaric's shoulders. "No king of mine will cross his border wearing chains." As they carried him toward Wintermere, Alaric saw the silver wolf banner flying above the pines. Home. A single tear slipped free before darkness claimed him. Chapter 20. The king came home. The bells of Frosthold had rung for victories, for coronations, for weddings, for funerals, for the birth of princes, for the passing of kings. But never, like this, their desperate toll shattered the quiet morning. Servants abandoned their work. Blacksmiths left glowing forges. Children stopped playing. Even the horses stirred uneasily. Something impossible had happened. Captain Hollis reached the gatehouse as a border ranger staggered through the gates. His horse collapsed beneath him. "Report." The ranger fought for breath, his face streaked with blood and melting snow. "My captain." The White Fang patrol intercepted 16 escaped prisoners crossing the northern pass before dawn. Murmurs spread through the courtyard. Why ring the king's bells for escaped prisoners? The ranger looked him in the eye. They refused to surrender the man leading them. Silence fell. They formed a circle around him. They drew stolen swords against our patrol. They swore that if anyone wished to touch him, they would first have to kill every one of them. Hollis felt his pulse quicken. What man? A wounded prisoner, wearing chains, an arrow through his side. He collapsed the moment he crossed the border stone. Another long silence. They called him. They called him. The world seemed to stop. Inside the council chamber, the report slipped from Cedric's fingers. "Say it again." The ranger repeated every word. Not one changed. Cedric closed his eyes. 3 years of hope and regret crashed together. What proof? The prisoners all told the same story. They survived because of him. They escaped because of him. He hesitated. One old prisoner said, "If your kingdom has forgotten this man, then it never deserved him." The words struck everyone in the room. Lady Agnes rose slowly, her hands trembling around her cane. For 3 years she had refused to empty Alaric's chambers. Every spring she placed fresh flowers beside his window. Every winter she changed his blankets herself. Now at last she whispered, "My carriage." Now. There was no royal procession. Families did not need ceremony to run toward miracles. Cedric rode until his horse nearly failed. Captain Hollis stayed beside him. Lady Agnes refused every request to slow down. Near the rear of the column, Evangeline quietly joined them, carrying only a worn satchel filled with bandages, herbs, and fresh bread. No one asked why. Some journeys were too important to miss. The border lodge stood beneath towering pines, lanterns glowing warmly through frosted windows. Rangers hurried between the stable yard and the lodge, carrying the wounded inside. The escaped prisoners refused to leave until they saw Alaric safely placed beneath a roof. Only after the physician himself promised, "Your king is in Wintermere now," did they finally lower their guard. Inside the lodge, boots, cloaks and blood-stained bandages lay scattered across the floor as the physician worked quickly to stop the bleeding. By the time Cedric arrived, Alaric had been cleaned, his wounds bound once more, and laid upon the strongest bed the small border lodge could offer. Windermere Rangers stepped aside as Cedric arrived, not for their acting king, for the man waiting beyond the door. His hand rested against the wood. It refused to move, not because it was locked, because hope had become heavier than fear. Behind him, Lady Agnes whispered, "He's waited long enough." Cedric drew one trembling breath and opened the door. Warm firelight filled the room. A physician stood beside the bed. 16 exhausted former prisoners lined the walls. The elderly prisoner stood beside the bed until Cedric entered. Only then did he quietly step aside, returning the man they had borrowed from death to his family. Cedric looked toward the bed. Time stopped. The man before him was thinner, older. His body carried countless scars. For one impossible heartbeat, Cedric didn't recognize him. Then the blanket shifted. The familiar wolf-shaped scar from the northern campaign caught the firelight. His knees gave way. "My brother." No one moved. Cedric crawled to the bedside, his trembling hand unable to touch Alaric's. Tears fell first, then the truth. "There were nights. No one wished you would never return. I never betrayed you with my hands, only with my heart. I wanted your throne, your crown. I wanted people to look at me the way they looked at you." His voice shattered. "When the river took you, I thought heaven had answered the ugliest prayer I never dared speak." He struck his chest. "I've lived inside that sin every day since. If you hate me, I deserve it. If you never forgive me, if you never deserve that too." He bowed until his forehead rested on the blanket. "I only ask, let me spend the rest of my life becoming the brother I should have been." Silence filled the room. Then, a scarred hand gently rested on Cedric's head. He looked up. Alaric's eyes were open, alive, exhausted, filled with tears. For a long moment he simply looked at his younger brother. Then he asked softly, "Tell me the truth. When did you stop wanting my crown, Tad, and start wanting your brother back?" Cedric broke completely. "The day the river gave me neither. I searched every village, every frozen bank, until I no longer knew whether I was searching for my king or begging God to return my brother." A tear slipped down Alaric's cheek. Slowly he reached forward, not for a crown, not for a throne, for his brother. "Cedric, I lost a kingdom. I never wanted to lose you too." He pulled Cedric into a painful embrace. The younger brother, who had carried a crown for 3 lonely years, finally wept like the frightened boy he had once been. Around them, the physician, the rangers, and the 16 former prisoners quietly turned away. Some reunions were too sacred to watch. Chapter 21. The woman he had never met. Morning settled gently over Frosthold. For the first time in 3 years, the castle awoke without mourning. The bells no longer sounded like farewell. Hope had returned. Inside the royal infirmary, warm firelight chased away the winter cold. The physician tightened fresh bandages around Alaric's ribs before stepping back. "You are fortunate." Alaric smiled faintly. "I've heard worse. You survived prison, starvation, a mountain escape, and an arrow through your side. I would rather not test your luck again." Captain Hollis chuckled. "So would the rest of us." For the first time since crossing the border, Alaric allowed himself to breathe, not as a prisoner or fugitive, but as a man finally home. Near the hearth, the 16 former prisoners rested beneath warm blankets. Some slept. Others stared into the flames, still startled whenever food appeared without permission. The old prisoner noticed Alaric watching. "They'll need time." "So will I," Alaric admitted. After a quiet moment, he turned to Cedric. "Tell me." His brother understood. "Everything." Cedric pulled up a chair. The kingdom survived. Relief softened Alaric's face. The harvests, good. The northern villages, rebuilt. The border, still ours. And Hollowmere? Cedric smiled. The grain arrived before winter. Taxes were forgiven. The new mill was finished. The children no longer go hungry. Alaric bowed his head. Good. One word carried years of gratitude. There were difficult years, Cedric continued. Some questioned the throne. Others wanted new rulers. But we endured. You carried that burden. Cedric shook his head. I carried your chair, never your crown. The silence between them needed no words. Lady Agnes finally spoke. There is something else. Alaric looked up. A debt you do not yet know you owe. Captain Hollis folded his arms. Perhaps we should begin with the wedding. Alaric frowned. The wedding? Lady Agnes nodded. When the kingdom believed you dead, the ancient rite could not be ignored. The council searched for someone willing to stand before the moon in your place. No noble house accepted, Cedric said quietly. The woman who stepped forward came from Hollowmere, the baker's village. Yes, Lady Agnes smiled. She offered herself so her people would survive another winter. No one forced her. Cedric continued. She believed she was marrying a dead king. She expected to spend her life as a widow. The room fell silent. What is her name? Alaric asked. Evangeline. The name lingered, simple, gentle. Cedric smiled. The remarkable part came afterward. She never asked for jewels, power, or privilege. Her first question was whether Hollowmere had received the grain. When we told her yes, Lady Agnes said, she thanked the servants. Captain Hollis nodded. The soldiers adore her. She remembers names, visits the wounded, comforts grieving families, and somehow always knows when a child needs kindness. Alaric listened in silence. He had expected ambition. Instead, he found a woman who had quietly carried his people while asking nothing for herself. Alaric remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "Did she come?" Lady Agnes smiled. She rode with us to the border lodge. She refused to stay behind. Captain Hollis allowed himself a small smile. She remained beside your bed until the physician finally ordered her to rest. He had to argue with her. Twice. Even Cedric's tired face softened. Lady Agnes continued gently. She helped clean your wounds. She changed your bandages. She refused to leave until she saw you breathing peacefully. Alaric lowered his eyes. For reasons he could not explain, the knowledge settled deeply inside his heart. He had never seen her. She had never spoken to him. Yet she had watched over him as though she had known him all her life. After another long silence, he asked, "Where is she now?" Lady Agnes paused at the doorway. "She's in the chapel. Every morning since arriving at Frosthold, she has prayed there." A gentle smile touched her face. "She doesn't know you've awakened. But today, I believe her prayers are finally about to be answered." The door closed softly behind her. Alaric looked out as golden morning light spread across the rooftops of Frosthold. She had waited 3 years for a husband she had never truly met. Now, it was his turn to wait. Only a little longer, somewhere beyond the castle walls. A woman named Evangeline was giving thanks to the moon for the life of the man she believed she had only just found. He had crossed kingdoms to return home. Tomorrow, he would cross a single courtyard and meet his queen. Chapter 22. The king met his queen. Morning settled gently over Frosthold. For the first time in 3 years. The castle no longer felt like a place waiting for someone to return. Its king was home. Sunlight spilled across ancient stone towers. Fresh snow glittered upon the rooftops. Somewhere below, servants laughed without realizing they were doing it. Hope had quietly changed the sound of the castle. Alaric stood beside the window. The physician had reluctantly allowed him to leave his bed. "Only if you promise not to behave like a king." Alaric smiled. "I've broken greater promises. The old physician sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." Captain Hollis immediately stepped forward. "Your Majesty, allow me to summon the guards." Alaric shook his head. "No. The woman who waited 3 years for a stranger deserves to meet the man." Not the king. No one argued. He wrapped a dark winter cloak around his shoulders. Every step still hurt. Every breath reminded him of the mountain. But for the first time, pain no longer felt heavy. It felt temporary. The chapel doors stood open. Morning light poured through stained glass, painting the ancient floor with silver and gold. Inside, one woman knelt alone. Her head remained bowed. Her hands rested quietly together. She was finishing a prayer. "Thank you for bringing him safely home." Silence followed. Then, "If he still carries pain, please let me help him bear it." Alaric closed his eyes. Prison had taught him how to endure hunger, cold, chains, loneliness. Nothing had prepared him for kindness. A floorboard creaked softly beneath his boot. Evangeline looked up, their eyes met. Time seemed to forget itself. For 3 years, she had imagined this face, the face of a man she had promised her life to. She had expected a king untouched by hardship. Instead, she saw a survivor. Scars crossed his face. Silver threaded his dark hair. His shoulders still carried invisible burdens. He looked tired, human, real, and somehow far more beautiful than any story had described. Alaric looked at the woman before him. She wore no crown, only a simple blue winter dress beneath a white shawl. There were traces of flour upon one sleeve. A tiny burn marked one hand. The hands of someone who baked bread, bound wounds, served others without asking who deserved it. She looked nothing like a queen from old legends. She looked like home. Neither moved. Neither seemed able to speak. Finally, Evangeline lowered her eyes. She slowly knelt. "Your Majesty." Alaric crossed the distance between them. His footsteps echoed gently across the chapel. When he reached her, he simply offered his hand. She looked up in quiet surprise. He smiled. "I think we've both bowed enough." She placed her trembling hand in his. He gently helped her to her feet. For a long while, they simply stood there, looking at one another. Alaric finally broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." She blinked. "You waited 3 years. For a husband who never came." A faint smile touched her lips. "You came." He shook his head. "Too late." "No." Her answer came without hesitation. "You came home." Those 3 words broke something inside him. Not painfully, gently, like ice surrendering to spring. He lowered his gaze. "I have been called many things. King, wolf, prisoner 27. But no title has ever frightened me. As much as the word husband." A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. She covered her mouth in embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh." Alaric smiled. "I was hoping you would for the first time." They laughed together. It was quiet, awkward, wonderfully human, and somehow it chased away the last shadow the prison had left behind. After a moment, Alaric reached beneath the collar of his tunic. He drew out a simple silver ring suspended from a thin leather cord. He looked down at it quietly. Then he lifted his eyes to Evangeline. "I carried this every day. I thought, the first time, I should give it back." Alaric's gently closed voice was calm. "The first time, the moon chose for us." He looked directly into her eyes. "This time, I choose, very carefully." He slid the ring onto her finger once more, not as part of an ancient law, not as a ceremony, not because duty demanded it, because his heart already had. Tears gathered in Evangeline's eyes. "This is our first day." Alaric smiled. "No." He gently took both her hands. "I think it's the first day of the rest of our lives, outside." The chapel bells began to ring. Not because a ceremony had been planned, not because anyone had given the order. The old bell-keeper had simply looked through the tower window, seen the king and queen standing together, and understood. Throughout Frosthold, people stopped what they were doing. They smiled. Some cried, others embraced. The waiting was over. Their king had returned. Their queen had found her husband. And for the first time in many years, Wintermere no longer felt like a kingdom missing its heart. It finally had both. Epilogue. Home. Spring arrived quietly. The snow that had buried Wintermere for so long melted into clear rivers once more. The fields around Hollowmere turned green. Children laughed where hunger had once lived. The village bakery never seemed to rest. Each morning, warm bread filled the streets with its familiar scent. Thomas smiled whenever visitors complained about the long line. Good bread, he always said, is worth waiting for. No one argued. At Frosthold. The castle had changed, not because its walls were different, because the laughter inside them no longer echoed against emptiness. Servants smiled without forcing it. Soldiers walked with lighter hearts. The 16 men once known only as escaped prisoners were no longer numbers. They had names again, homes, families, and every year, on the anniversary of their freedom, they gathered at the palace, not to celebrate surviving prison, but to remember the king who had refused to leave even one man behind. Cedric stood beside his brother on the castle walls. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Cedric smiled. The kingdom never needed a perfect king. Alaric looked toward the valley below. It only needed people who refused to stop loving it. Their shoulders touched. No more needed to be said. Later that evening, Evangeline found Alaric standing beside the river that flowed beneath Frosthold, the same river that eventually joined the waters which had once carried him away. She slipped her hand into his. Without looking, he held it. I used to think home was a place, he said quietly. The castle, the crown, the kingdom. He turned toward her. I was wrong, she smiled. What is home now? Alaric gently kissed her forehead. Wherever you are, above them. The evening bells rang across Wintermere, not to mourn, not to warn, but to remind every village, every family, and every lonely traveller that after the longest winter, hope still finds its way home.